In the serene garden of Lumbini, surrounded by the lush vegetation of the Himalayas, an event was witnessed that would mark a before and after in the spiritual history of humanity. Queen Maya, belonging to a noble family in the kingdom of Sakya, gave birth to a child who would bring the light of knowledge to the shadows of ignorance in the world. Prince Siddhartha Gautama, as he was named, was born in extraordinary circumstances. It is said that her mother, Queen Maya, dreamed of a white elephant that descended from the sky and entered her womb, an omen of the greatness that was to come. Tradition tells that the prince was born standing and took 7 steps immediately after his birth, each step blooming with magical lotuses. King Suddhodana, his father, filled with joy and fear over the prophecies surrounding the birth of his son, decided to protect him from the harshest realities of life. Siddhartha was raised in opulence and comfort, with the hope that he would become a great king who would rule with wisdom and compassion. However, fate had other plans for the young prince. Despite his father's efforts to keep him oblivious to the suffering of the outside world, Siddhartha was destined to embark on a journey of personal discovery that would transform not only his life, but also the lives of millions throughout the centuries. In the kingdom of Sakya, protected by the imposing mountains of the Himalayas, the young prince Siddhartha Gautama lived surrounded by wealth and comfort. From his birth, he was raised in an environment of great opulence, destined to be the heir to a powerful lineage. Siddhartha had at his disposal 3 majestic palaces, built specifically for each season of the year. The Winter Palace, with its warm rooms and burning fireplaces, the Summer Palace, with its cool gardens and dancing fountains, and the Palace of the Rainy Season, designed to contemplate the beauty of stormy skies and the earth nourished by heavenly waters. Life in the palace was a constant parade of pleasures and entertainment. Siddhartha wore fine silk clothing and was followed by servants who protected him from the sun with ornate parasols. The palace maids, dancers, and musicians filled their days with joy and festivity. Despite his youth, Siddhartha was a prince with a slender and delicate build, gifted with a careful education. His teachers, 2 wise Brahmins, were amazed at his rapid understanding and skill in both letters and mathematics. Although he was the son of a king and a contender for the throne, Siddhartha was also instructed in martial arts and all the disciplines necessary for a future monarch. However, beneath that life of pleasure and luxury, he lay a sensitive and thoughtful spirit. Siddhartha, although not yet aware of it, harbored within him a deep longing to understand the truth behind human existence. This longing would be the catalyst that would drive him to eventually abandon the security and comfort of his princely life to seek answers to life's deepest questions. Prince Siddhartha Gautama, living in the opulence of royal palaces, was unaware of the deepest truths of human existence. His father, King Suddhodana, had ordered that he be kept away from any vision of suffering, illness, or death, in the hope that Siddhartha would never wish to abandon his life of luxury to seek a spiritual path. However, curiosity and destiny led Siddhartha to take 4 walks outside the palace walls that would change his life forever. On his first walk, he encountered an old man whose hunched back and faltering gait revealed the inexorable passage of time. Siddhartha, astonished, asked his squire coachman what was happening to the man, to which he replied that it was the natural course of life. On his second walk, Siddhartha came across a sick man, covered with sores and in a state of great suffering. The sight of the illness, so foreign to the protected reality of the palace, impacted him intensely. The prince began to understand that pain and grief were universal aspects of the human condition. The third walk showed him death in its crudest form, a corpse being carried to its final resting place. Siddhartha was disturbed to realize that death was the final destiny of all living beings, regardless of their rank or wealth. Finally, on his fourth walk, Siddhartha encountered an ascetic whose serenity and peace contrasted sharply with the previous scenes of suffering. This man had renounced worldly pleasures in search of spiritual answers and seemed to have found a deeper meaning in life. These encounters shook Siddhartha's world and prompted him to question the meaning of life and the nature of suffering. He could not return to the ignorance of before, He had seen too much. The seed of spiritual restlessness had been planted, and with it, the desire to find a way out of the cycle of suffering that he now knew was part of human existence. Prince Siddhartha Gautama's life was marked by luxury and protection, but his heart harbored a restlessness that could not be satisfied by worldly pleasures. Encounters with human suffering had ignited within him a flame of compassion and an insatiable thirst for knowledge that propelled him toward a destiny beyond the palace walls. One night, under the starry canopy, Siddhartha made the most momentous decision of his life. With a heavy heart but firm in his resolve, he silently bade farewell to his wife and son as they slept, knowing that his spiritual quest required immense personal sacrifice. Riding his horse Kanthaka, accompanied only by his loyal squire Channa, Siddhartha abandoned the kingdom he was destined to rule. Upon reaching the banks of the Anoma River, he stripped off his royal robes and cut off his long hair, symbols of his past life, thus renouncing his inheritance and his identity as a prince. This act of renunciation was not a rejection of his family or his kingdom, but rather a maximum expression of love and compassion for all beings. Siddhartha knew that only by freeing himself from the bonds of attachment and ignorance could he find the answers to alleviate the world's suffering. With dawn, the prince who once lived among riches became a wandering ascetic, seeking wisdom in the solitude of the forest. He was willing to explore the limits of the mind and spirit to achieve a deeper understanding of reality. After abandoning the luxuries of princely life, Siddhartha Gautama entered the jungle, determined to find the truth that lies at the heart of human suffering. He joined a group of ascetics who believed that the path to enlightenment lay in the denial of body and mind through severe austerity practices. For 6 years, Siddhartha led a life of extreme rigor. He subjected himself to the harshest mortifications, fasting to the limit of his strength, exposing himself to the elements, and meditating for long hours in search of spiritual transcendence. His body weakened, his skin stuck to his bones, and although his resolve was iron, the truth remained elusive. In this period of intense searching, Siddhartha reached deep states of concentration, known as dhyanas and samadhi, which provided him with glimpses of understanding and inner peace. However, despite these experiences, Siddhartha realized that mere torture of the body brought him no closer to freedom from suffering. In a moment of introspection, and with the clarity that only despair can bring, Siddhartha understood that neither indulgence in sensory pleasures nor extreme self-mortification was the path to enlightenment. It was then that he decided to follow the middle way, a balance between these two extremes. Renewed in his focus, Siddhartha sat under the bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya and vowed not to rise until he had found the answers he sought. It was here, in the shadow of this sacred tree, that he would finally achieve enlightenment and become the Buddha. He had renounced everything, had practiced the most severe austerities, and now, in the stillness of meditation, he sought the final answer to the cause of human suffering. As the night progressed, Siddhartha entered a state of deep concentration. His mind, clear and serene, began to penetrate the layers of reality. In the first watch of the night, his inner vision opened and he was able to remember all of his past lives, seeing the eternal cycle of birth and death to which all beings are subject. In the second watch, his perception expanded even further, and Siddhartha could see how all beings rise and fall in the cycle of samsara due to the laws of karma. He understood that each person's actions, good or bad, establish their destiny in a future existence. As the third watch arrived, Siddhartha faced the final challenge. Mara, the Lord of Illusion, fearing that Siddhartha would break the chains of human suffering, threw powerful temptations and fears at him. Evil spirits, storms, and visions of desire tried to divert him from his path. But Siddhartha, with an immovable mind, transformed each attack into a vision of clarity and compassion. The arrows became flower petals, and the temptations became teachings. Finally, in the last vigil, as the morning star rose in the sky, Siddhartha attained enlightenment. His mind was freed from all ignorance, and in an instant of pure understanding, he became the Buddha, the awakened one. He saw reality as it is, free of illusions and suffering, and understood the Four Noble Truths that would be the basis of his teachings. This moment of enlightenment was the turning point in Siddhartha's life and in the history of humanity. From then on, the Buddha would dedicate his life to teaching the path to freedom from suffering, guiding countless beings toward peace and understanding. After achieving enlightenment, the Buddha did not keep the wisdom he had discovered for himself. Instead, he chose to share his deep understanding with all those who would listen. Thus, he began to teach the Dharma, the path to truth and liberation from suffering. The Dharma, represented by the Dharma wheel, symbolizes the teachings that the Buddha imparted throughout his life. These teachings are based on the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, principles that guide beings toward overcoming suffering and achieving enlightenment. The Buddha taught that refuge in the Dharma is a refuge in enlightenment itself, in the security and protection that truth offers. By following the Dharma, one protects oneself from suffering and ignorance, finding refuge in wisdom and compassion. Along with the Dharma, the Buddha established the Sangha, the community of those who follow his teachings. Originally, the Sangha was made up of monks and nuns, but over time it expanded to include all practitioners of Buddhism. The Sangha is like a congregation, a mutual support group on the spiritual path, where members help each other in their practice and meditation. The Buddha taught that interactions with other believers are critical to spiritual maturity. In the Sangha, practitioners find guidance, inspiration, and companionship in their search for truth. It is in the Sangha where the Dharma is lived and breathed, and where the courage to follow the path to enlightenment is strengthened. After a life dedicated to teaching and serving humanity, the Buddha reached the last days of his earthly existence. At the age of 80, feeling that his time in this world was approaching its end, the Buddha decided to impart his final teachings and prepare for parinirvana. Parinirvana is the final state of nirvana that is reached after the death of the body when a person has achieved enlightenment in life. It is the supreme goal of Buddhism, which breaks the cycle of death and rebirth and dissolve the skandha, the 5 aggregates that make up existence. In his last moments, the Buddha was in the Kusinara forest. Surrounded by his closest disciples, he imparted his final words of wisdom to them. He reminded them of the impermanence of all things and urged them to continue diligently seeking the truth. Everything composed is impermanent, he said. Work diligently for your liberation. With these words, the Buddha entered the various stages of meditation and finally reached parinirvana. His body was cremated and his relics were distributed and venerated in various places, becoming pilgrimage centers for followers of Buddhism. The Buddha's parinirvana was not a sad event, but a celebration of his life and teachings. It was the culmination of his journey and an example to all that liberation from suffering is possible. What did you think of this story? This video has been created for Mythology. See you soon.